Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qizhi. Coming up in this edition, Russian President Vladimir Putin warns that attacks on Russian territory will drag its conflict with Ukraine into a global dimension, while Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy calls the Russian strike with a new ballistic missile a severe escalation. The US-China People's Dialogue underway in Beijing has attracted over 100 participants from a broad range of sectors. And Kenyan President William Ruto has defended his administration's economic record in his State of the Nation address in Parliament. We begin with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Russian President Vladimir Putin says the Ukraine conflict has taken on global dimensions after attacks by Western missiles on the Kursk and Bryansk regions in Russia. He said that Russia reserves the right to target military facilities of the countries that use their weapons against Russia. He vowed that Russia will respond decisively in case of escalation in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Putin confirmed that Russia has successfully tested a new medium-range ballistic missile in response to enemy actions. Dasha Chernyshova reports.
We're hearing from the Kremlin the general line which suggests that the outgoing administration of Joe Biden is adding more fuel to the fire and tries to make this conflict escalated as much as possible. That is the accusation that the Kremlin has actually issued after the Storm Shadow missiles have been intercepted and after 6 ATACMS missiles were fired by the Ukrainian side against Russia's Bryansk region shortly after Ukraine got the permission to strike targets deep inside Russia with the US-supplied weapons. So definitely in Moscow there is the perception that this conflict is being escalated. Moscow is pointing at the United States, saying they are interested in that, but also the Russian ambassador to the United Kingdom say that it is the UK that is now also directly involved into this conflict. The idea in Moscow is that the use of those types of weapons is impossible without the satellite data and the navigation systems coming from the Western countries, and therefore these Western countries are directly involved into the conflict. Having said that, we also have heard Maria Zakharova, the spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry, on Thursday addressing the issue of the new U.S. base in Poland, which she said the opening of this base, she said, was yet another provocative step in a series of deliberate provocative and escalatory moves by the Western countries. She said that base was, if necessary, put to the Russian list for potential destruction if Russian interests were actually attacked and if there was any sort of attack against the Russian Federation. So certainly we are hearing that escalation on both sides, but Moscow here is saying that it is the Western countries that are doing everything possible to make this conflict escalate as much as possible before the new administration in the United States takes the Oval Office.
That was Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says a Russian strike on the central city of Dnipro with a new type of missile is a clear and severe escalation. This comes after Kyiv launched US and British-made missiles into Russia. Moscow responded by firing the new hypersonic medium-range ballistic missile at a Ukrainian military facility. Megumi Lim has more from Kyiv.
Well, this latest missile attack against Dnipro has come as tensions have significantly risen between Ukraine and Russia with all that has happened this week. The U.S. lifting restrictions on Ukraine's use of the American-supplied ATACMS missiles against targets inside Russia, and reports saying that Ukraine has also for the first time used the British-supplied Storm Shadow missiles against targets inside Russia. And also this week, Russia having lowered its threshold for a nuclear strike with its updated nuclear doctrine. And now with this latest missile attack, Ukraine accusing Russia of having launched for the first time an intercontinental ballistic missile. These are very powerful missiles that are capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. But Ukrainian president accusing Russia of using Ukraine as a testing ground for these ICBMs. He's saying that experts are currently investigating what weapon exactly was used, but according to preliminary analysis, he's saying that the speed and altitude of the missile matched that of an ICBM.
That was Megumi Lim reporting in Kyiv. Turning to Asia, the annual US-China People's Dialogue is underway in Beijing. the event has attracted over 100 participants from a broad range of sectors, including diplomacy, tourism, ecology, artificial intelligence, and business. They believe dialogue between Chinese and American people is necessary to foster stronger connections and develop people-to-people ties despite political differences. Guo Tianqi spoke to some participants to find more.
The second China-U.S. People's Dialogue is taking place in Beijing. The event brings together Chinese and American people from all walks of life, including tourism, science and technology sectors, as well as sports and arts.
Of course, I hope to see more and more sports exchanges. While playing sports, you must cooperate with teammates and compete with opponents. It is very suitable for young people from different countries and regions to exchange and understand their strengths and weaknesses.
For me, partly because I'm an anthropologist, people-to-people exchange is basically my job. I want to understand China from the perspective of Chinese people, how they perceive it, how they view it, and then I want to try to help sort of transmit that perspective and translate it to an American audience.
Political instability has brought a range of challenges to China-U.S. relations. One example, on November 19th, a U.S. Congressional Anti-China Advisory Panel called for ending the country's permanent normal trade relations with China, a status which has been in effect for more than 2 decades.
That's not a good step. I think that we can negotiate, we can change the relationship, we could even try to modify it in our own interest instead of the other interest, but I think you have to keep it going. It's already doing harm. It harms anything in business involves companies, the stock market, trade. It not only just affects businesses, but it affects ordinary people like you and me, right? So yeah, it's a very serious decision, right?
Art is one of the most powerful and important ways to bridge gaps when governments are facing tensions, when economies are competing, when the newspapers are telling very depressing stories. The arts are crucial to keep the ties between people together at a very basic level so that, again, we don't get lost in the tension, we don't get lost in the controversy. We continue to see the beauty and the humanity in each other.
This event was jointly hosted by the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations and Tsinghua University, and more than 100 participants have gathered here with hopes of developing people-to-people ties despite political differences.
That was Guo Tianqi reporting. Still in Asia, the 6th Human Space Symposium is underway in southern China. The 2-day symposium in Shenzhen comes as the country pushes ahead with its future space goals. Sun Ye has more.
The 6th Human Space Symposium started Thursday in Shenzhen with some 800 experts attending. It comes as China's space station is nearing 2 years of full operations and as the country presses ahead in its future development, including the goal of landing taikonauts on the moon by 2030. Participants at the symposium, including a taikonaut, gave keynote speeches on China's human spaceflight development, scientific advances coming from China's space station, and what it takes to maintain the National Space Lab. They also discussed topics on longer-term human stay in space, support for lunar exploration, and more.
China Manned Space Agency had said earlier in October that for the Long March 10 carrier rocket, the manned spacecraft called Mengzhou, the lunar lander Lanyue, the spacesuits to be worn by taikonauts on the moon, as well as for the manned lunar rover, the production and ground tests for all the prototypes of these products are underway as planned.
That was Sun Ye reporting. Finally, in Africa, Kenyan President William Ruto has defended his administration's economic record in his State of the Nation address in Parliament. Ruto says inflation has declined dramatically from 9.6% in September 2022 to 2.7% in October 2024, the lowest rate in 17 years. He says the country's foreign exchange reserves surged by $2.4 billion to hit a record of $9.5 billion. The president announced the cancellation of 2 major contracts with India's Adani Group, including a controversial airport deal that triggered worker protests. Enoch Collier reports from Nairobi.
Kenyan President William Ruto said his administration had directed the immediate cancellation of the procurement processes for 2 high-profile projects with the Adani Group. He made the announcement during his annual State of the Nation address. The two projects are the expansion of Nairobi's Jomo Kenyatta International Airport and a $700 million contract to construct power transmission lines awarded by the Ministry of Energy.
I now direct, in furtherance of the principles enshrined in Article 10 of the Constitution on transparency and accountability, and based on new information provided by investigative agencies and partner nations, that the procuring agencies within the Ministry of Transport and the Ministry of Energy and Petroleum immediately cancel the ongoing procurement process for the JKIA expansion.
The move follows a major development in the United States, where Gautam Adani, founder of the Adani Group, and 7 other executives were charged with bribery and fraud. According to U.S. authorities, the Adani Group orchestrated a scheme involving more than $250 million in bribes to secure solar energy contracts in India. The allegations also claim the group misled investors during a $750 million bond offering. The Adani Group has denied the accusations, calling them baseless and pledging to pursue legal recourse. Kenya's Energy Minister Opiyo Wandayi had defended the initial awarding of the transmission line contract, stating there was no evidence of bribery or corruption. Despite these reassurances, President Ruto emphasized the need for accountability, signaling his government's wish to explore alternative ways of ensuring the proposed infrastructure projects go on.
Immediately commence the process of onboarding alternative partners, because these are important projects.
Many in Kenya have welcomed the cancelled contracts. The airport deal, which would have leased the country's main airport for 30 years to Adani in exchange for expanding it, sparked protests in September that caused massive flight delays. The Aviation Workers Union argued that the deal could lead to job losses. The power transmission project also faced intense public scrutiny, with Kenya's High Court blocking the deal back in October.
That was Inoxi Collier in Nairobi. Now recapping the headlines, Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned that attacks on the Russian territory will drag its conflict with Ukraine into a global dimension, while Ukraine's president calls the Russian strike with a new ballistic missile a severe escalation. The US-China People's Dialogue underway in Beijing has attracted over 100 participants from a broad range of sectors. And the Kenyan President William Ruto has defended his administration's economic record in his State of the Nation address to Parliament. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thanks for listening.